France 24 Chief International Affairs Editor Robert Parsons, and from New Haven, Connecticut, Ben Kiernan, Director of the Genocide Studies Department at Yale University. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. I'll begin with you, Ben Kiernan, and ask you. On paper, of course, Khieu Samphan, the more senior of the two, since he was the head of state under the Khmer Rouge. However, Nuon Chea, who is also known as Brother Number Two, was really the right-hand man of Pol Pot.
Yes, both of these criminals convicted today are quite big fish in the Pol Pot regime. Nuon Chea was really number two in the regime. He was deputy in the party that ruled in the Pol Pot regime. He was, as you said, Pol Pot's right-hand man. And Khieu Samphan was the head of state of the Pol Pot regime. These are very senior figures. They're not just the last surviving leaders of the Pol Pot regime. They're very big fish indeed. So it's quite important that they were convicted not only of crimes against humanity several years ago and on further charges today, but also of the most heinous crime of genocide today. Nuon Chea on 2 counts of genocide, Khieu Samphan on 1. It's a big,
Go ahead.
Big blow to their prestige, and it's a very important historic accomplishment for the tribunal and for the Cambodian people.
You say a big blow to their prestige. Did they still have supporters?
They do have supporters, but a very small number. But they had a kind of arrogant attitude that they were somehow representing the Cambodian people, and that has been undermined by today's verdict. The way they postured in court as innocent representatives of Cambodian nationhood has been undermined by the genocide verdict. I think that they cannot claim that status anymore, and they will serve a lifetime in prison.
Robert Parsons, we heard at the end of that report how Cambodia's current leader, the increasing autocratic to many, Hun Sen, has decided there won't be any new charges filed against anyone.
Yeah, I mean, just one point to make, first of all, before I go on to that, about these two men. Remember, they were already in prison for committing the most heinous crimes against humanity, murder, torture, extermination among the charges against them. This is slightly... No,
this was over the mass evacuation of Phnom Penh.
Yeah, this is on the charge of genocide. Remember that the vast majority of the population in Cambodia is Khmers, including the Khmer Rouge. So the charge against genocide was specific against minorities inside Cambodia, including the Chan Muslims and Vietnamese. In the case of the Chan Muslims, something in the region of a third of the 300,000 Chan Muslims were exterminated. In the case of the Vietnamese, most of them were forced out of the country, but of the 20,000 that were left, they were almost to a man exterminated.
You had Chan Muslims and Vietnamese making the trip to Phnom Penh to be there for
I think just
for the verdict.
To see this brought to an end, you know, I think this is the frustration. This goes back to the question you asked me as well. What goes up? What happens next? Certainly, you know, Hun Sen has made it absolutely clear that he wants to put a stop to this. Remember that Hun Sen is himself formerly a middle-ranking member of the Khmer Rouge. It's not entirely surprising, therefore, that he should want this to come to an end. And there's been a lot of political pressure on the extraordinary chambers and the courts of Cambodia, this UN-backed tribunal, to stop this process for some considerable time. Of course, not just because of the political pressure, but partly because of the costs, $300 million so far and still counting, and the glacial pace at which things have progressed. But there's that factor there as well.
Let me put that to Ben Kiernan. Yeah, $300 million spent, only 3 convictions. The court's been around, Well, as long as our news channel. It was opened in 2006. Is this a victory, or would you say that the verdict on the court is mixed?
Well, it is mixed, but and of course, justice delayed is justice denied. It's nearly 40 years since the Khmer Rouge were in power, and the court is not responsible for that entire delay. The importance of the genocide verdict is in symbolic terms in Cambodia. Many Cambodians believe that not just the minorities, but also the large number of Cambodian majority victims were subjected to genocide, and the symbolic importance of that term genocide and the conviction of these two top leaders of the Pol Pot regime being found guilty of genocide is, I think, very important to all Cambodians, not just the minority groups who were legally subjected to it. I would also say that the importance of the ethnic Vietnamese being found to have suffered genocide during the Pol Pot regime is very high. It's largely a minority group that are subjected to discrimination and persecution in Cambodia today. And the fact that they are now found to have suffered genocide under the Pol Pot regime should give pause to Cambodians who attempted to continue the subjection of the ethnic Vietnamese minority to persecution and discrimination today.
When Hun Sen, the prime minister, says we don't want new cases brought because they could bring instability, how strong is his argument, Ben Kiernan?
I think it has some force, but I think there is an argument which lacks merit. There are other senior Khmer Rouge leaders who could well be tried, and there is a serious case to be made for that. It's also worth pointing out that in the 1980s, when the Khmer Rouge were still a fighting force, having been overthrown, but with many soldiers, a large army still attempting to regain power, many of them were captured and were subjected to prison sentences or sentences, what was called re-education in that period. I would estimate tens of thousands, perhaps 40,000 Khmer Rouge officers and soldiers, middle-ranking officers and soldiers, were given sentences of many years, sometimes months, 18 months, up to 5 years. It would be very difficult to retry those people when they weren't given a fair trial at the time, although many of them were Khmer Rouge forces and possibly had committed crimes. But to go down the list now and try many of those Khmer Rouge who have served time, although perhaps without being given a fair trial and perhaps not a long sentence, it would possibly cause instability in the society. On the other hand, there are some even more senior leaders who could well be tried. The agreement was with the UN, between the Cambodian government and the UN, that only senior leaders and those responsible for the most heinous crimes would be tried by the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia. And a number of people who do appear to fit that description have been slated for prosecutions, but the Cambodian Prime Minister has said that no more trials will go ahead. It should also be pointed out that apart from the three senior leaders who have been convicted, there have been others who have faced trial, including Ieng Sary, who was a very senior leader and foreign minister of the Khmer Rouge regime, but who died while facing trial. And his wife, Ieng Tarit, who was also a member of the Khmer Rouge senior leadership, was found by the judges to be unfit to face trial for the mental disability. Another senior Khmer Rouge commander who was in jail didn't get to face trial, but died in jail before the court was set up. So quite a few of the top leaders of the Khmer Rouge regime did die in jail or even indeed face trial, but didn't face judgment, as
So
well as the three
this is an
who have
important
now
day.
been convicted.
Ben Kiernan, we're coming up next year on the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide and the 40th anniversary of the fall of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. What lessons can the world draw?
Well, I think one thing that has happened, if you think about these two men who've been convicted of genocide today, they never imagined that this would happen to them when they were committing the genocide. They never imagined that they would one day face an international tribunal and that they would face a sentence for the genocide that they were perpetrating. The international legal climate and the international legal mechanisms have changed a lot in the 40 years since they committed those crimes. The Rwanda Tribunal and the Bosnia Tribunal have convicted perpetrators for those genocides. And even though after those tribunals were established, the Chinese government has said it would no longer support ad hoc international criminal tribunals of that nature, which was why the Cambodia Tribunal is a hybrid court of a mixed nature, which includes internationally appointed judges, but is based in Cambodia and had to be negotiated with the Cambodian government. But nevertheless, it is under the influence of the international legal community, and it has made some achievements in bringing perpetrators of crimes against international law, including genocide, to justice. This was almost unthinkable 40 years ago. So we do have to consider the context of the last few decades and the advances in the punishment and the advances of international criminal prosecutions.
Yale University's Ben Kiernan, many thanks for joining us here on France 24. I want to thank as well our Chief International Affairs Editor, Robert Parsons.